Yo, this episode of Bass Freaks is brought to you by Dunlop Super Bright Bass Strings. Dunlop Super Bright Bass Strings put your sound front and center with a bright yet musical top end, balanced fundamental, and a warm low end. Designed from the ground up to fit the vision of what a string should be, Super Bright Bass Strings provide a superior response that allows the natural voice of your bass to come through. Made in California at Dunlop headquarters, go to jimdunlop.com and check out Super Bright Bass Strings. Hello, my friends and bass freaks. Welcome to Bass Freaks presented by Dunlop. Are you a bass freak? If so, you are in the right place. This is a spot for us bass players to chat it up and inspire one another. Have some fun. I am your host, Josh Paul. And today, we welcome a very special guest, the legendary Mr. Hutch, Hutchinson. Round of applause. How are you, man?
I'm good, man. I'm over here on Maui, digging the rays. Ooh. So anyway, it's nice. Been nice. Been a nice place to be during the pandemic. But I've been back and forth a couple of times. So up until I let tourists in again, there was virtually no virus here. And I have a lot of musician friends here. So it was a fun place to be, actually.
Who's near you? Who are you playing with while you're at home?
Over here?
Yeah.
My neighbor right up the block is Pat Simmons, who's the leader and founder and most constant member of the Doobie Brothers. And Michael McDonald has a place in the neighborhood. And Willie Nelson's been in Texas, but he's a presence here and has been since the early 80s. And Mick Fleetwood, of course, is here. He's also been here for a couple of decades. Steven Tyler and quite a few luminaries. But, everybody sort of gets together now and then. I'm sort of more of the Doobie Ohana, as they say. So I play with Mike and Pat and Dave Mason, former member of Traffic, who wrote Feeling All Right and all those tunes. And he's over here and loves it. And Paul Simon's here as well with his wife, Edie Brickell. So there are a lot of other great musicians in Hawaii. Hawaii's sort of like New Orleans, whereas I think musicians sort of the local guys are really sort of fearless and are willing to pick up any instrument at the blink of an eye and play something great. I think New Orleans is like that too. Music is part of the culture, whereas music is just some places it's something you listen to in the background or your parents listen to or you grew up wanting to do. But I think over certain cities, certain places, certain cultures, it's like eating breakfast. You do it every day.
That's really a beautiful thing. I mean, it's just universal. And I really do appreciate the fearlessness of the locals there. I mean, you're in some great company. I mean, you're on Hawaii or on Maui and having fun and in the, I would say, paradise, really. If you're unfamiliar with Hutch, he's a fellow bassist that has a ridiculous resume. I mean, from working with little tiny artists like Bonnie Raitt to Ryan Adams and Bryan Adams to B.B. King. I think you played on a couple million albums and maybe like two that nobody's heard of.
Who knows? A lot. I started young and kept at it. So, and I think back when I started, when I was a teen, I wanted to make records, and I don't think a lot of people were I don't think a lot of people aspired to that. Being a studio musician wasn't really something that people were aware of even. I mean, there weren't a lot of people doing it back then. So I sort of walked into it at an early age in my mid-teens and started making records like my buddy Bob Glob and a few other guys who were directed. So I think we had ideals and dreams and we sort of followed through, and we were lucky enough to be in the right places at the right time, having people mentor us like Lee Sklar and for me, George Porter and, a number of other bass players, even like Tony Levin, who's from sort of my hood when I was growing up, and a number of other people. So I've been blessed in that way, I think.
That is so crazy. Why bass?
I played mandolin and guitar when I was a preteen. Bluegrass was really sort of happening, and the blues, it was sort of the mid 60s, the sort of folk revival of the late 50s. My mother was big time into that. So there were a lot of Bill Monroe records and Pete Seeger records and Arlo Guthrie, I was about the same age. He's a little older, but I mean, I was in this scene in Boston and Cambridge, especially, where there was a diversity of music and culture that I don't think people would have had in many other places in the U.S. at that time. Now, of course, you can go online and gain access to these forums and different cultures from around the world. And I think back then you didn't have it. You had to really seek it out. If you wanted to listen to a chess record, you wanted to listen to Muddy, you wanted to listen to anything, Gabi Pahanui from Hawaii, you really had to search it out. It's funny, Ry Cooder is big, who I've had the pleasure of working with a number of times over the years. And he and I will talk about this. I remember when he was going to Cuba to do the Grammy-winning Buena Vista Social Club project.
Yes.
We were both in Ocean Way, and I ran into him in the lobby, and he said he was heading down to Cuba to record these guys. And I was familiar with a lot of the more contemporary Los Van Van and Eje La Banda were bands back then that were sort of changing the face of Latin music. And I think, which I had a fair amount of exposure to, and I'd worked in that world. I lived in Latin America for a while, but Ry was into tracking down these musicians who were popular in the 1930s and 1940s, who really influenced everything that came after them as far as Latin culture and Latin music goes. So they created that world, as well as the cats in New York. But Ry, I think he's of that ilk. And like my friend Taj Mahal, same way. I think they looked for forms and they looked for artists who had influenced generations of musicians. And whether they're known today or not, I think they felt also that was part of their life path, was to make other musicians aware and make our culture aware of these different artists. So it's very important. Like basically the Beatles with Little Richard, or a lot of younger country artists with Willie and Merle and Waylon and these people, or even rock artists. I mean, going back to whether it's rockabilly or metal or whatever, there are people who preceded you going back 30, 40 years, maybe 50, 60, 70 years. And, you need to be aware of those people, I think, if you're a younger musician coming up, because they influence the people that influenced you.
Right. And it also helps your versatility. And if you
in a big way.
Not only to be a well-rounded musician, but human being as well. I think that when you study different music and you're exposed to it, it really broadens your cultural sort of empathy and knowledge.
Very true. And I think more people, not just musicians, should be, and especially Americans. I think only 40-something% of Americans even hold passports. So I think it's important to experience different cultures. And for me, I was sort of lucky because as opposed to just listening to this stuff, I actually got to work in Central America and South America. I actually ended up working in Australia, and I actually ended up working in the West Indies. I worked at Compass Point a lot, which was Chris Blackwell's studio in the Bahamas, where he recorded Toots and the Maytals and Bob Marley and so many other artists. But he also recorded AC/DC and Steve Winwood and so many rock artists in the same studio. So, I mean, just for me to physically go and be part of these cultures and having the opportunity to work with anybody from B.B. King to, the same month work with B.B. King, the Chieftains, Ziggy Marley, Garth Brooks, completely different cultures, completely different, same notes. I mean, but as far as culturally and musically, completely different, worlds apart, So that's a blessing and a privilege. But also, if those opportunities arise as a younger musician, I think one needs to be prepared for them. So one needs big ears and need to be able to accept different forms and understand, because we only have so many notes to work with. So it's really about how people utilize and play those notes as far as rhythmically and melodically, sonically in general. And I think in order to be prepared for those moments in one's life, especially if one's a studio musician, one needs to be exposed and open to these forms. And there were certain types of music when I was a teenager, I know I'll never play this. I don't even appreciate it. And as I got older and went to these places, I learned to love it. So certain things I wasn't even open to when I was 16 or 17. Later on, 20 years later, I was going, oh man, this is great. I love this record. And I immersed myself in it. And I think that prepared me for all of these different opportunities. And whether it was even film scores, I mean, things like this, or TV themes or whatever. You know, I just did a track. It's for a show called, Money Heist.
Okay.
And it's a big show on Netflix. And
Yeah, I've seen it.
Yeah, and so we did a new score for that, and it's all Latin based. It's really Italian based. The title theme, the theme song, is an old Italian song, and it's funny. I thought it was a huge song in Spain, and the guitarist on the session, Diego Garcia. This was actually the last recording session I did before the pandemic, so it was like March 6th of 2020. We did it at Village Recorders in Santa Monica. Great band, top-notch band. But Diego grew up in Spain. And I said, oh, do you know this song? And he said, oh, yeah, everyone in Spain knows this song. And I said, really? He said, this was the song during the Spanish Civil War, before World War II, that the non-Republican troops, the freedom fighters would sing going into battle. This was an amazing thing to me, because I didn't realize it had any historical or social relevance in that way. It was just sort of an Italian polka to me, you know, and he said, no, that was a heavy song, because it was about leaving your family and your woman behind and going to fight in the war. So, I mean, it's great finding these things out and researching them. And it's great that a guitarist on the date from Spain hit me to this fact. Well, it was before I tracked the song, whereas if you listen, it sort of sounds like a light, you know, Italian, we'll have a glass of Chianti and some pasta here. It's like type of thing, but it's not that at all. It's a much more heavy song.
Man, that is awesome.
Yeah.
So tell us about from your first pro gig, which one was it?
My first pro gig?
Yeah. As a professional musician. Well,
I mean, that's sort of hard to say, because my mom passed away about 14 years ago, and
I'm sorry to hear that.
That happens, and she lived a long life, and she was a brilliant woman. She worked for NASA. She was a physicist and an engineer, started working for IBM in the 40s. So she worked on some of the first satellites and worked at MIT on guidance and control systems computers for the Apollo project. So I was sort of immersed in that world. Actually, when I told her I wanted to become a musician, physics was my fallback career. So it was like, she said, you can always come back here. I'll give you 2 years to get a record deal or accomplish something. And otherwise, you have to come back here and get either a teaching degree in music or work with me at the labs at MIT. And because math and music were always tied together for me.
Hand in hand, right.
So and a lot of her coworkers actually played music, you know, on the side, whether it was jazz or bluegrass or whatever. So anyway, prior to that, I got to spend time with my mom, and I remember, you know, doing a lot of gigs. I was in a band in Boston, and I was 12 years old.
Wow.
12 to 14 years old, and I was making money while friends of mine were bagging groceries.
And you were playing bass.
I was playing bass, I'd started playing, you know, acoustic guitar, mandolin, started studying cello in school, playing double bass, studied with a great teacher in Boston who played with the Boston Symphony for half a century. And then I saw Wilson Pickett when I was young, and a couple of other bands and at matinee performances. 65, I was 12 years old, so I saw Wilson, but his band at that time was comprised. Jimi Hendrix was playing guitar. He was one of the two guitar players. And Billy Cox, later to play with Hendrix and Band of Gypsies, were in Wilson's band at the time. And I was right at the foot of the stage, right in front of those guys. And I didn't realize later, of course, Hendrix wasn't a commodity then. So it was 2 years before the first Hendrix album was released. So but it's still seeing them up close, and with Wilson, who I got to play with a lot later in life, a fair amount later in life, record with and play a couple of gigs with. it was a big day. So I went to my mom. I needed an electric bass. I mean, that was it. So later on that year, I saw Howlin' Wolf at a place in Cambridge called Club 47, which is now called Passim. I was on the street. I couldn't get in the club. I was just looking through a basement window watching the band. And I wanted an Ampeg B15 and a Gibson EBO, just like his guys. So I ended up I still have the EBO and I still have the B15. So, but the band I was in, we ended up winning. WBCN is still like one of the big rock stations in Boston, and they had a sort of battle of the bands, and we won the battle of the bands. And
of course you did.
Of course we did. Actually, the drummer, great drummer, which we depend on as bassists. So I mean, it's like the drummer helps us sound good sometimes, and
you've played with some of the best. I was reading, man.
Yeah. But anyway, this band, when we won, our one of the prizes was we got to open for a couple of bands in the Boston area. One of the bands was Vanilla Fudge, of which Tim Bogert was the bass player, and Carmine on drums, and the other band was the Yardbirds. And I was 13 years old, and it really was an amazing thing for me to be opening on a concert with a band like that, because I loved the Yardbirds at the time. I couldn't believe it. We also opened for Moby Grape. So that's before I was a teenager, That's
insane.
It was a big deal. Yeah. I was very precocious and musically and otherwise. And so it worked out, but it sort of, I caught the bug, so to speak, I think.
Yeah.
And, I wanted to, I decided I wanted to do it professionally, and my mom was supportive. The male members of my family, not so much so, but
that's not a real job.
Totally. I think that's the way things were then.
Man, I was fortunate in the fact that I never had that. My whole family, from the time I was very, very young, like 7 years old, they were always supportive. My grandfather played every instrument there is, and he encouraged me to play the instruments. As long as I treated them with respect, I can make as much noise as I wanted. And
that was in Southern California?
It was, yeah, LA.
And did he play professionally, your grandfather?
My grandfather did. He had a Dixieland band.
Oh,
he
fantastic.
He played clarinet, bass, guitar.
Fantastic, sax. Well, which was common back then. I mean, I think, I lived in New Orleans for a long time. I had family on the Gulf, and sort of family presence there. And, I played with the Neville Brothers for years when they first started out, and I worked with Alan Toussaint and, Dr. John, and, a lot of great R&B singers, Ernie Cato, Lee Dorsey, Jesse Hill, Earl King. And down there, I think, especially in New Orleans, a lot of the older cats, they really pointed out to me that, back in the day, genres were really created in the 1950s and 60s by writers. So back in the 30s, 20s, when Dixieland, jazz, blues, the cats who were playing music didn't really look at those gigs, those forms, those genres as being all that different. I mean, it was all music. It's
all
like
just music.
Duke Ellington's famous quote of, there are two kinds of music, good and bad, and
I love that.
That. And that's how I think a musician should approach playing, when doing what we do. I mean, you really need to be open to these different forms, as we were saying earlier. I think that's so important,
I completely agree. So give me your best gig and your worst gig. You don't have to name names.
Best gigs are like, all gigs are good, but I mean, you have better gigs. Some are better than others. You have favorite gigs. I mean, I think my first big gig was here in Hawaii. It was in Diamond Head Crater for 40,000 people on New Year's Day of 1973. So we did sound check midnight on New Year's. So right at stroke of midnight was our sound check. It was with Santana and a band called Copperhead that I was in. And I believe it was a band that later became Journey. It was.
Oh, wow.
It was Neil Schoen and Greg Raleigh and my friend Pete Sears on bass.
Okay.
He's played with numerous people, Pete keyboard and bass, and Greg Arico from Sly and the Family Stone on drums. But it was basically Neil and Greg. So that was, what later became the early Journey band. And they were, of course, remnants. They were both from Santana's band on a few records prior to that. So it was an amazing thing because I'd never played a gig that large. And it was in Diamond Head Crater, and I was here in Hawaii. And I'd been in another band a couple of years prior called Lucky Mud, which is a line from a Kurt Vonnegut novel and a phrase from a Kurt Vonnegut novel. But they had been here, and they had opened for Hendrix at the HIC, which is now the Blaisdell Arena here in Hawaii. They did 2 nights, 1970, just before he played here on Maui and Rainbow Bridge. And one of his last gigs, he died in that. I think that gig was in July. I think he passed away that September. But people say, were you in the band then? And I go, no, I joined the month after they opened for Hendrix. But I think when they opened for Hendrix, I was just out of high school. So,
Gotcha.
But I was lucky to get in the band at that point. And they brought me to the Bay Area. It brought me to Santa Cruz. And I had a great experience. But they just released the record we did 30 years ago. So it's a pretty cool record.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Where can people get that?
I think they should look online for it. The band was called Lucky Mud. My guitar player ended up, guitarist Angelo Rossi went up on to join Pablo Cruz and a few other bands that had some success. And the drummer, Ken Corday, who actually financed this recent project of releasing this record that we cut at Ocean Way in LA 30 years ago. He's the executive producer of Days of Our Lives and the owner of the show.
Wow.
Hence the budget.
Dude, you really need to write a book. Seriously.
I still need to work before I write the book.
Yeah,
I have other stories I'm not going to talk about today.
So, let's talk about 2020. It's been an interesting last year with the whole pandemic. How are you doing? How are you surviving the pandemic as a musician, as a human being?
I'm doing great, actually. I've talked about that, and I just did a thing for NPR, All Things Considered, doing interviews with different musicians, talking about how you made it through the pandemic, basically. I think it's called Stuck at Home. Dave Lawrence, who's one of the NPR anchors here in Hawaii, was doing it for their National Archive. And they interviewed everyone from Alice Cooper to Steve Morse and, from Deep Purple and, a lot of other musicians of varying genres and the Wilson sisters and all these people. And I think everybody, what I said early on when I did a thing for Bass Magazine online. And anyway, I talked about how creative people need to create. I mean, it's sort of part of our DNA. And if we don't have the opportunity or create the opportunities to do that, then we're lesser for it. We start having issues sometimes because I know that playing music helped me get through my teen years in a big way. There's a woman over here with her husband. I went to high school with her. She said, "God, you were so quiet in high school." And he said, "That's because I thought I was going to get beat up all the time." It's like, I wasn't on the football team. I was playing bass, and I wanted to be a studio musician. I mean, it's like people were like, "He's crazy, isn't he?" But anyway, I think that's why we need inherently to create and play music and write or do whatever we like to do as far as the creative person. And so I set up a studio here on Maui, which I'd never had, and, in one of the back rooms in a back bedroom. And I also, a lot of my friends here, Pat Simmons, I did some tracks for him, and I was sending tracks to Nashville and London and Ireland and Boston, and a lot of which are online now. My friend Gary Nicholson, who's a producer in Nashville, had me play on a bunch of stuff. My friend Holly Lursky in the UK, we had a song called Home Is My Shoulder. If you go to YouTube and look up Holly Lursky, Home Is My Shoulder, it's an amazing video. It's drone footage of San Francisco during the first lockdown. So it's an empty city of San Francisco. You'll see a mural of Greta Thunberg is on the first, and it's in the first shot.
It's beautiful.
Anyway, so it was great being able to work remotely with people. Also, a couple of friends, we barely had any COVID here. We had a couple of cases a month. So because nobody was coming in or out really. So I was able to go to some friends' studios and work a bit and played on a couple of tracks for people over here. But really sending tracks to people in other places and learning how to do home videos for these composite things. And,
you're staying busy, man. That's
busy,
awesome. Yeah.
Also planning with Bonnie to we're going to be recording a new record shortly. I mean, she's big on. She could always go out and tour on her past catalog, which is huge.
Yeah.
And but the thing, and we still sell large venues. I mean, we tour as a package with James Taylor. So I mean, we've been preparing. Things were canceled. We were supposed to tour Canada in April of 2020, May. That's been postponed. That was postponed till this September and October. We're doing a lot of makeup dates later in the year. And we're starting to record in late May. And so we've been prepping all that stuff.
It's great.
So, yeah.
Well, man, I'm just in awe of your playing. And
thank you, man.
Your resume, it's ridiculous.
It's good to see you.
Man, much love to you, bud. I hope we get to hang.
We'll be playing with each other before long. But there's a light at the end of this tunnel. And I think it'll be like turning on a light, basically, once this happens. Things will change dramatically quickly if everybody's responsible and does the right thing.
I 100% agree.
Oh.
But I got a couple rapid fire questions. Well,
cool.
Are we ready?
Yes.
Text or call?
Text.
Okay. Active or passive?
Oh, God. Depends on the situation. Can I say that?
Good answer.
That's sort of a non-answer.
All right. Fuzz or overdrive?
Overdrive.
Okay. Dunlop strings or Dunlop streams?
Of course. MXRFX or MXRFX.
Yeah, exactly.
Can I go there for a minute? This isn't product placement, but my first, here I am with a bass chorus deluxe, which is great, which is an amazing little unit, I think. And but my first effect of any sort was a Phase 45 when they first came out in the early 1970s, with the old sort of English traditional script on it. It wasn't as industrial looking as it has been for years, and that sort of changed the way I approached the instrument. I mean, effects can, in the right situation, can really enhance whatever you're doing in a big way, especially the track. So on Bonnie's Nick of Time record later on, so it's 1973, 74, I get the Phase 45, I get the Phase 90. Then the big yellow chorus comes out. Man, I use that on everything. People were like, can't you please turn that off for a minute? And I would split the signal. I'd run into two different amps, but I mean, one amp always had the chorus on it to some extent or another. So when I did Bonnie's Nick of Time record, I actually went in 1988 and swept the Grammys in 89, which is really 90. And on three of the better tracks, my favorites on that record, I actually ran an MXR chorus through a polytone and then went direct. So the amp tone, which is a little overdriven, actually has an MXR chorus all the time. I mean, I live for these things. Anyway, I just wanted to throw that in.
No, I love it. That's
sort of product
awesome.
Placement.
Dude, I really want to thank you. Like I said earlier, I am in awe. I would love to do this again. Thank you all, Bass Freaks, for listening in. Stay healthy, stay kind, spread love and good vibes and inspiration. And remember, you got this. Follow your path and just play.